is not appropriate and is unbecoming of this committee.
We don't want to attribute motive.
So 2,000 people are sitting homeless right now. I think it's a little bit of a priority, and some kind of language should be used. If Canadian pension funds divest from oil and gas, will this have any impact to reducing emissions, or will it only move capital from one beneficiary to the other?
Unfortunately, it will do the latter. So what it will mean is that you can only sell if somebody else buys. We think of it like a boycott, like a customer boycott. So if I don't buy products, they're going to stay on the shelves. But that is not true in capital markets. You can only sell if there's a buyer. And in fact, it may well mean that the buyer is somebody who cares less about climate change than you because they're willing to buy those stocks. So you actually no longer have a seat at the table to engage. So not only do you lose the higher returns from carbon, unfortunately, I wish this was not the case, but unfortunately evidence is that emitting firms earn higher returns, perhaps because this is an externality, not an internality. You not only lose that, but you also lose your ability to engage with these companies.
What would be the impact to retirement savings if the government forced climate-related disclosures on Canadian pension funds in an attempt to meet Paris climate targets?
It's not clear to me what the goal of disclosures are to begin with. It's like saying, well, the best way to lose weight is to have more accurate scales. No, it's actually to take real action here. So it seems we're all about disclosures and taxonomy, but this can lead to you taking action in order to beat whatever taxonomy that there is here. So it's not clear that it will have any positive impact, and yet you're going to have to put a lot of effort into disclosing. For example, Unilever, I believe, is having to hire 10 people for the next 5 years to just disclose information. Not actually to do anything, but to disclose what they're doing. So this is something where there's a direct cost of disclosure, and then the indirect cost might be that you focus on the measures that are being disclosed rather than actually creating value, as I mentioned in my diversity comment earlier.
Will a government regulation of ESG scores and climate change disclosure statements on financial institutions have any impact in reducing emissions?
Well, before you have a regulation, you need to think, what is the problem to which regulation is a solution? So you might think, okay, ratings here, we need to regulate them because they disagree with each other, and that's bad. What is another word for disagreement? It's diversity. We can have legitimately different opinions on the ESG of a company. As we've discussed, there's so many complex issues here that it's hard to say what's green or brown. It's actually fine for ratings to disagree, just like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley might disagree as to whether a company is a buy or sell. So I'm not clear what regulation would achieve in that place, in that instance, because it's not clear what the problem is to which regulation is a solution.
So there's really no clear answer to reducing emissions.
There is a clear answer, which is there's not going to be a clear positive effect.
Okay, we're pretty much done. So we'll go to Mr. Longfield for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to start off with the with Mr. Rajitsi. In terms of Canada's positioning in the international banking system, Canada has been very respected for our system of regulations in the banking industry, but we're not being as well recognized for our ability to apply externalities to the banking system in terms of sustainable finance. If we're not able to correct the ship there, what's the impact on the Canadian banking industry?
I would say that our banks, our largest banks, were happy to participate in the federal government's Sustainable Finance Action Council, and we did a lot of good work collaboratively to produce an initial taxonomy roadmap report. The government gave the updates earlier this month that they're looking to make further progress. So I think that's one form by which our banks are active participants in supporting sustainable finance activities in Canada.
And I think participating on the Action Council was very important, and I think really sent a clear message in terms of the commitment of the banking industry towards sustainable finance, but also in terms of the government's commitment to getting it right. What's the risk if we get it wrong?
I think we obviously want to support the energy transition in Canada. We're doing all we can to work closely with our clients. Our largest banks, some of their initial targets were focused on the oil and gas sector. They're continuing to work towards progress towards achieving those targets. So it's hard to answer that question. I'm not a climatologist in terms of what could go wrong, but obviously there could be serious consequences, and our banks are doing everything we can, whether it's through the SVAC, whether it's complying with OSCE regulations, to ensure a good energy transition in Canada.
And I think in terms of the business of this discussion, I mean, I was managing director of a firm in Canada that was UK centered. We were operating in various countries around the world. Canadian banks are also operating in various jurisdictions, including the EU. What's the pressure on compliance for Canadian banks operating in other countries and then transferring compliance to Canada?
We definitely work to be in adherence with the regulations around the world on which our banks operate. Definitely the EU has their own corporate sustainability reporting directive that may impact some of our banks. So we're definitely making sure we're going to be compliant with that directive for those banks to which it will apply. I would also say at an international level, the International Sustainability Standards Board that I mentioned in my opening remarks has done a mapping to those European sustainable reporting standards. So that will be helpful for our banks that are impacted to understand how they need to comply with them.
Trying to close the door on this is it's an impossible thing because we are in a global market and have to react to global winds of change.
I just wondering if we can have an update on Minister Boisseneau.
I'd love to give you one, actually. He says probably in December.
Probably. It's been over 20 days. He was supposed to be here last week.
Yeah.
When the order came through, and why December? I think there's
I don't know.
people at Jasper.
Really? He did. They say he's not available till December, so we're working on it. We want to get him here.
So he's going to leave the people of Jasper just hanging for that long.
No, I don't think that's
and what
his
he's going to do.
But we'll yeah.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Well, yes, Mr. Longfield. No, Mr. Vancouver. I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Vancouver.
This kind of language. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This kind of language about a minister's availability, presupposing that the minister is leaving people hanging is not appropriate and is unbecoming of this committee.
We don't want to attribute motive.
So 2,000 people are sitting homeless right now. I think it's a little bit of a priority, and some kind of language should be used.
Okay, but I just think we don't want to attribute motive or impugn. But the fact is, we're working on it for December. That's the fact of the matter. Mr. Longfield, you still need to.